somebody to get online. So if somebody makes a comment in the chat box, we'll know it. Okay. Just need somebody monitoring chat. All right. Good evening. It's time for us to begin our study here in the adult class. We are going to do a combination tonight of lessons 7 and 9. I'll take this off. You'll be able to hear me more clearly. And there you go. So we're doing 7 and 9 tonight. They're kind of 6, 1/2 dozen of the other. The questions, actually, you could take one set of questions from either one of them and use them for both, because they're both about entertainment. One of them was about television shows, and the other one's about movies. So they're both forms of entertainment, if you will, that are publicly available for us to see and or purchase. So we'll talk about that tonight. Let's begin. Let's have a word of prayer to begin our study, and then we'll begin. Heavenly Father, thank you for the opportunity that brings us together, that we can gather here to open your word, to talk about it, to study it, to dwell on it, to think about how we can be better servants in your sight. It's our desire, Father, to please you, to do all things in accordance with your will, that we might learn how to be light into this world. Help us, Father, and be with us as we study, and it's our desire to please you, and we ask it in Christ's name. Amen. All right, I want to make one quick point. Bob announced it, I'll announce it again. The adult class on Sundays, we're going to start doing through the end of the year. So for, I think it's 5 weeks, we're going to be doing more character studies. We've been doing character studies out of Genesis. And so we've got a new set of 5. Now, if you want to get a copy online, you're welcome to go get your own copy. We've picked 5 from this book. It's on Padfield.com, David Padfield's website, and it's a set of studies by Jeff Asher called Men and Women of the Old Testament, rather. And so we're going to do 5 of the lessons from Jeff Asher's book, 5 characters that we didn't study when we did the first set here from Gene Taylor, that class book. Okay, this week is the first one of the 5 that we're doing is Simeon and Levi, right, and what they did. And so also, though, if you want a copy, of course, there are copies up here on the front seats. Feel free to come up and get your own copy. I'm just saying it's at Padfield.com if you want to get your own electronic version of it as a PDF. You can download it for free and get it there as well. So I just wanted to make that announcement as we get started. All right, so Hooray for Hollywood is ultimately tonight's study. And so lesson 7 is titled here, Our Times Daily, Son Kills Mother After Appearing on the Jeff Kinney Show. And I'm not going to take the time, because we're doing 2 of them tonight, I'm not going to read the whole story, but the gist of it basically is that in this case here, you had a situation where mom was killed by her son after they clashed on his show, and this isn't the first clash of individuals. He had the Klan on last year, and 14 people got hurt when they came on, and there was a brawl in the audience. There have been other situations here when people came on with drug abuse and or unfaithful to their spouses, and et cetera, et cetera. So in a nutshell, this guy's show is a train wreck of humanity, and it bears remarkable resemblance to what show that we all know by name. Not Flinger, but Springer, right? Jerry Springer, right? The Jerry Springer show. Huh? Yeah. Oh, you couldn't understand? I couldn't understand with the mask on. Yeah, Jerry Springer, right. And it's So, if, and I put up here on this as we start discussing the show and the fact that it's popular though, right? They bring in ratings. People, Jerry Springer was on, he's not on now, but he was on for a long time. I want to say 12, 13 years, something like that. It was a long time. It was a long run of a show. It was one of those shows that about 2 minutes of it was all I'd ever want to see, any given time. That's probably all I've ever saw at any given time. 1 or 2 minutes enough to say, yeah, enough of that, move on. But it specializes in conflict, right? And that's the whole point of the show is conflict. And it's I call it a variation on the theme of if it bleeds, it leads, right? In news media, conflict, sensationalism sells. And if sad but true, but if it didn't work, they'd quit doing it. So it sells, and that's why they continue to do it. Maury Povich was not quite as wild, but on a similar vein. Yeah, and frankly, even today, I think about there are variations on that theme of conflict. Some of them are, I look at shows like that and think, is there any constructive purpose here? Probably not. Now, there are other shows where there's lots of conflict, and at least there's a purpose there. Classic case to me, Dr. Phil. Dr. Phil is a very confrontational show too, at least up front. But at least, it has, I'll use the term, a redeeming quality that they try to get down to understand what's the real issue here so we can resolve it. At least they're working towards something productive there. I never saw that with, Maury Povich and or Jerry Springer. It was all about the conflict. And the more conflict we could bring and have people mad at each other and all worked up and so on, then, the better the show was. If it leads, it bleeds. Why do people want to watch this kind of thing? That was my first, what is it about us, and us, human beings, we're wired in such a way that we would want to even watch this kind of a thing? Bob?
Morbid curiosity.
There you go, morbid curiosity. And I'm just going to, this is an observation, take it for what it's worth. During the Depression, there was an old movie that called They Shoot Horses, Don't They? And remember what was the theme of the movie? It was these people that were involved in these dance marathons. And they would go on for days and days, and they'd be dragging each other, and people would pay money and go sit down for hours on end to watch these people trying to stay up and not fall down, keep the marathon going. And why would you do that? Why would you do something like that? And it's not different than, to me, in my own mind, watching one of these shows.
Years ago, you were ground for hanging. Execution in Europe. There's something that, I don't know that I understand it, but there's something that involves people in that.
It's exciting at the moment, perhaps.
What about all the schoolyard fights start?
In a schoolyard fight, everybody would gather around to watch the two, usually two fellows, the two fellows go at it. Now, that was always interesting to me, just an aside, because they could be fighting each other and then they'd make up and they'd be fine an hour later. It was always funny how kids do that, but they do. They'd fight it out and then they'd be fine. They just had to have their moment of get it out, I guess. But human nature, there's something about the way we're wired that, one, we like something that's exciting and unusual and perhaps even morbid at times. We're curious about it. Why do we stop and look at an auto wreck? It's like we're curious about that. What happened? Do I really need to know? No, not really. But I just can't help myself but stop and want to look at that, and take note of it and what happened. Sometimes, that is a tool that can be used against us. Can it not? What are people doing here? They're watching this show, and of course I started asking them the next question. If we watch it because we're just so curious, we can't help ourselves, we're always curious about things, You know, we may run out of air. I heard a quote one time. We may run out of air to breathe and water to drink, but we'll never run out of questions. You know. Yeah, the gazers, backup. Yeah, right, absolutely. But the question is, when you think about that, why am I interested in even watching this to begin with? And then you start asking yourself, well, what benefit does the show provide to us? Or to our culture, to us collectively, or to us as individuals? What's the benefit of me taking an hour out of my day and watching Jerry Springer and having some fella and his illicit affair, and he brings this woman in, and they have it out with his wife and family, and they have a big fuss, and they're pointing at each other and yelling at each other and so on. And what's the value in that for me? It tells you, yeah. And sometimes I was thinking about the dance marathons. Maybe it is that in a morbid way, I like to know that there are people whose lives are more messed up than mine. Frankly, I think that maybe that's part of it, is that people want to know that, hey, there are people in worse shape than I am. And why would I go watch a dance marathon in the Depression? Because I'm broke, I can't find work, things are pretty hard for me, but at least they're worse off than I am. It's a way of escape, right? To focus on something else instead of my own situation. And so I wonder if that's part of the rationale here. But yeah, I don't know if anybody would argue with me to say there's really no redeeming benefit to this kind of a show where the whole focus of it is the conflict and stirring people up. Sometimes I also think people want to think that their lives, that their opinion matters for something. And Frank, I think that's part of the culture today. The social media. I want people to know what I think, and I want them to think that what I think is important. Rather than saying what I think really doesn't matter, in the matter. I have no choice in that matter. What do you care what I think? Now we live in a culture now where what I think is important, and you should know it, and it should influence you. Classic case. Hollywood, we're talking about movies tonight. How many people at Hollywood need to tell me who I should vote for? Well, does it really matter this actor or that actress or so on, who they want to vote for? Does that matter to me? Does that change my situation? Does it, but yet now that's the culture. That's the way our culture has become, that we feel the need to be important, self-important, if you want to say it that way, rather than saying, you know what, I need to keep my time and my attention on what I need to do. You got things you need to do. You work on yours, and let me work on mine, and let's leave it at that. Which was a little bit more of the way we used to be as a society than what we are today. So yeah, there's not much benefit. Does a show like this, if I watch this show every day, is it going to help me grow? And I mean the way I need to grow, spiritually speaking. Is this kind of a diet going to help? If this is the diet of what I see and what I hear, is it going to help me to grow spiritually? No, just the opposite. Great point. That there are ways in which I can spend my time taking in things that aren't helpful to me. Now, there are things that I can take in that might be useful but not helpful as well. I mean, I can think about, I could go and read lots of books about things that are trivia matters or so on, and there are people who are really very good at trivia, knowing different things about, they know, you see them on Jeopardy, folks on Jeopardy, man, they can just whittle down the list, There's a point at which knowledge has its value, but we need to understand knowledge is not the same as wisdom, and wisdom, if it's misplaced, is worthless. There are people who truly believe that God doesn't exist, and they think they're wise. In fact, they think they're wise because they say God doesn't exist. You see? So we can allow ourselves to be fooled by what we take in. You know, we choose what we take in, and then it influences us. It's a cycle. We choose what to take in, and what we take in will ultimately influence our decision and our thinking. And so I think this is a classic case of this. You know, people who take this in and watch it, you got to say, are they going to improve their lives as a result of it? I suppose the only good argument I can see made that I might learn is don't do that. You know, I might watch a whole lot of shows of don't do that, and don't do that, and don't do that. But wouldn't it be better if I spent time saying, well, what should I do? Rather than learning the 1,000 things not to do, why don't I learn the 2 or 3 that I really do need to do instead? Go ahead, Derek.
I think of Luke 11, where Christ talks about casting out demon wonders back to the house. Move and replace. You have to replace it. Else you've got a tidy house.
Right, yeah, great point, great point. Yeah, that parable, she swept the house clean, and then they returned to the house and find it cleaned and swept. And great place to take up residence, right? And great point. Derek makes the point that we not only do we need to sweep the house clean of those things that need to be removed, but we have to replace that with something of value. So we have to not only remove, but also plant things in there new that occupy that same time, that same bandwidth, if you will. And so, you know, the issue, Romans 14:19, let's go have a look at that verse. And then ask the question here, what should we be striving to do? Let's go to Romans 14. Come on. I'm turning my pages a little slower tonight, sorry. Romans 14. So then we must pursue what promotes peace and what builds up one another. So what does it say to pursue? Let's pursue things that make for peace and that build up one another. So God's desire is that we spend our time or our energy, our bandwidth, if we want to use that word, spend it on things that are going to be positive, that will help us and give us something positive to build us up together. You know, we can spend time reading things that are destructive, that can tear us down. We can spend time on things that are negative and destructive rather than the constructive.
Garbage in, garbage out. And that's exactly what you're saying. Garbage in. If you don't put anything wholesome, valuable in, the only thing that's going to come out is those things unwholesome and valuable.
Right. And so, you know, that brings up the point as we begin to look at this. If we're striving to do things that are positive, that build us up, that make us better people, then that tells me, one, I have to make choices. I have to choose what I take in. And that may mean I look at something and say, nah, not going to do that. I may look at something else and say, yes, I need to do this. I have to make choices about those things. Gene. Mm-hmm. Yeah. You make a really good point here about that, is that, let's just say, the TV is not your babysitter. Because if you think about that, what does that mean? What if the TV is your babysitter, there's little control. You have less control over what's being seen. Now, I will tell you this cuts both ways. The TV is like a tool. You know, I've made the point about tools in my toolbox. I can get a wrench out of that toolbox and I can use it to fix a broken car. I can use it to build equipment or machinery or something else. I can also take that wrench out of the car and bludgeon somebody to death. It's a tool. You know, whether it's good or it's bad depends on the person who's holding it and using it, right? Television can be that way. Television can be used for harm. If I take what Hollywood wants me to see, you know, Hollywood now is in that mindset of it's got to be R-rated to sell. If it's not R-rated, it doesn't sell as well at the box office. Now, I will tell you, it's funny. Mike Reed and I, it was probably 4 years ago now, Michael Medved was talking. It was on holiday break. I was home, but we were listening to Michael Medved, who's a movie critic, well-known critic, talking about that fact. You know, the Hollywood wants the R-rated. Now, he said, it's interesting when you look at the top sellers this last year, all of them were family movies. And he said, it's interesting, year on year, Hollywood says our movies sell, but when you look at the numbers at the end of the year, it's consistently the family movies that sell. So that just tells me that the people in charge, they have a direction they want it to go, but that's not really what people want.
You know, I think Hollywood would say that, well, what we're putting out there is just,
Right.
that's not what they want at all. They don't want to reflect our culture.
Right. There's a difference between reflecting the culture and wanting to change the culture. That's absolutely right. Yeah. Now, for me, and we'll talk about this a little bit more here as we flip over to the next lesson. I think personally, the PG-13 movie is probably one of the worst movies of all, because when a movie is R, it's clear what's going on. When it's PG-13, you're not sure. You know, when it's PG, you're probably good, you know. And that's the thing about movies, you know, as we flip over and we'll go over, let's go on over and talk about, we've talked about similar television shows on the air today. We've talked about the names of them. Yeah, and I think we've really covered that. I want to move on and talk about the Titanic a little bit here before we run out of time. So we're doing about right on time here at the moment. So let's go over to lesson 9 and flip over on the other side to the movie side of the business. Yeah, and this is also becoming blurred, isn't it? You know, I buy a streaming service and like Netflix, and I can go watch movies on Netflix, but I can watch TV shows that have already aired on Netflix as well. So the two of those are getting more and more blurred for us. Now, the plus thing to me about that, where entertainment is going now, is I get to choose more. You know, now if I'm watching a movie that's inappropriate, that's my fault. You know, I used to walk into a movie theater and I might see something I didn't plan to see. And I didn't know I have to deal with that. Now, when I can be at home and choose what I'm going to watch, it's a little harder for me to make an excuse that it wasn't something I should be watching, because I have choice, man. I can stop at any time I want to and move on to something else. You know, and there's no reason, you know, when I'm streaming that I shouldn't, if there's something I shouldn't be watching, that I can't stop it. There is absolutely no reason now. And that's one of the good things about where entertainment has gone, is that I have more control than what I used to have with the streaming services. So, you know, that's one of the plus things. Don't need to go to a movie theater so much anymore. I'll just wait for it where I can go watch it on a service that I'd rather do. So in that respect, it's a positive for me. Now, in lesson 9, the Titanic sinks the competition at the box office. And of course, the movie, you know, it has, and it emphasizes here the love story aspect of it. And there is a scene in there with sexually explicit material or scenes of nudity in the movie. And that was the PG-13. Yep. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yep. There you go. So my first question about movies, about the Titanic and movies in general, is what criteria do you use to decide if a movie's fit to see? I think this is one of the most challenging parts of it for us anymore is what movies are we going to see? I mean, frankly, Rita and I we don't go to a movie theater very often anymore. It's been a while. I mean, it's got to be something we just look at and think, oh, wow, that really interests me. I think the last movie we went to see was the Red Sea Miracle was actually the last movie we went and saw. Or The Passion, we went and saw The Passion of Christ, yeah. You remember? The Resurrection. It was called Resurrection. Yeah, it was a story about the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, told from the point of view of a Roman soldier that was involved and saw the resurrected Christ and so on. It was obviously a fictional movie, but it was an interesting movie. And the history part of it was accurate, although the character was a fictional character. That was an interesting movie. But how do you decide if a movie's fit to watch? Movie or television show? Denny? Yeah, so your comment here, and I'll just say it for people online, is why do they have to change the history of it? You know, why not just tell the story the way it happened? Why do you have to change the history? Again, Rita's comment, there's a difference between us reporting what was or reporting what we want you to see. You see, if I'm trying to persuade you in some regard, or I think that the story by itself is boring and you need this fictional thing on top of it to make it interesting, okay? Use that term. Dennis?
People don't line up outside theater.
Okay.
If people paid the money, that's what they make.
Uh-huh.
I mean, that's part of it. I think it's easy for us to say, why don't they?
Ultimately, they do what they think will sell, you know.
I think one of the things we have to remember is the industry, television industry, does have an agenda. And they include things in there that they're trying to desensitize the world about, like homosexuality and other devious behaviors and so on and so forth. They try to normalize, make it less sinful.
There is some pressure to do that, and I'll give you an example. In the news not too long ago, now the Academy Awards have a set of criteria that a film must meet to be eligible for Best Picture of the Year. You don't have to meet the criteria to win any other award, but to be eligible for Picture of the Year, and there were like 6 or 7 different criteria, and they were like, for example, somebody who is deaf or hard of hearing is in the cast. Somebody who is LGBTQ, in that category, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, so on, somebody like that in the cast. And for each of those things that you did and the numbers of people that met those criteria, you got a certain number of points. And you have to have a certain number of points for your film to be eligible for Film of the Year. All right, so they've introduced this, they call it a diversity quota into... Right, exactly, and that's why I said it. I mean, that's a recent example of where the film industry is trying to, use, whether the word wokeness or whatever the term is anymore, but nevertheless, they're trying to influence filmmaking by influencing who's in the film, and so...
Influence the audience with
Directly, yeah, directly, indirectly.
lifestyles, and et cetera, et cetera.
Right, right. And ultimately, we didn't talk here in either of these here about Hollywood as role models. That would be a different discussion, wouldn't it? You know, years ago, people from Hollywood would often be considered as role models. I want to be like him or like her. I want to live their lifestyle and that sort of thing. I don't know. Maybe it's me getting older, but I don't see as much of that now as what you once had. I think it's less powerful. And frankly, part of it's because there are more people acting and they do all kinds of different things now than they used to do. Maybe that's part of it. It was a monopoly back in the day, you know. Big cinema, there were only a few of them, and so they had a lot more sway than what they do today. Media now comes in all forms and shapes, and I think that changes it as well. But the criteria, I'm going to make one more quick point. The one good thing about the criteria that's today, they do a better job for us as consumers on why was a movie classified. When I go to watch a movie at home on my AT&T TV or on Netflix or Hulu or whatever, before I start that movie, it shows me the rating and it tells me why it's rated. It will say it's PG for language, or it's PG because of subject matter, you know, like maybe it involves wartime or something like that. And so it does give me some ability to judge why that movie was classified PG or PG-13 or R or whatever it is. It tells me why. And then the code tells me to what degree that must have happened, that it would meet that code. So as a consumer, I am better informed now in that one regard than I used to be. That's the positive. Now, the downside of it is, why did we need the movie classification system? Because back in the day, you know, you go back when I was a child, anything that wasn't G or maybe on the edge of PG today wouldn't be even allowed to be shown in the theater. It would never have made it on the screen. So society has changed that. At least they've done me the favor of helping me to make a call. Do I even want to consider that movie, or that's out of scope? Gene. It does. It does, absolutely. But it's on me. Ultimately, who's responsible for it? Me. Right? I'm the one that makes the call on that. Am I going to watch it? And I'm responsible for what I see and for what my family ultimately sees as well. Denny. The halftime show. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There's the halftime show at the Super Bowl has gotten, you know, they show clips the next day. Anymore, it's like, just turn off the I don't even want to see it, you know. I don't even want to have to judge it. I'm just done. You know, I don't need to watch the halftime show anyway. So that's a great time to go get chips and dip again, you know, that kind of thing. And so, yeah, anymore, it used to be you could watch it. Anymore, I would tell you, I wouldn't see it. Wait till tomorrow and listen to the news broadcasters telling you what it was all about. Maybe I'll decide if I want to see any of it at all, because probably don't need to be seeing it. That's where culture has gone, right? And again, they're making a choice in what they think the average Super Bowl user wants to see. You know, the people that run the broadcast, you know, obviously they're trying to keep people watching the show through the halftime. So they think that's what you want to see. Now, as a Christian, I may say, I got no business seeing that. You know, and so I'm going to flip off the TV or go watch something else and then come back when the halftime show's done. They're getting ready for the rest of the game. Do you think there are Christians who would find nothing objectionable about the Titanic or similar movies of that ilk? Sure. So, question is, what do we do about that? First thing I would tell you is, one, directly, it's my concern is for me first, me and my family, right? That's my responsibility as a Christian first. And if every family would take care of their own properly, there would be no need for that to that discussion, right? But the fact of the matter is, some brethren have no issue with those sorts of things. And so, what do? How are we going to make progress on that? It's a hard question. Right. Mhm. Right. You may, for my family, I make the choices. I can't control what another family does. That's a lesson children have to learn, right? And that's one growing up that you got to learn. What mom and dad says goes in in our house. We have no control over that house. Yeah, a lot of other issues, same thing. Yeah, and sometimes that we have to warn the kids. They may do that. We're not going to do that. You understand our rules of our house. Go ahead, Gene, you had your hand up. Have a discussion on it. Before you go down it. Yep, great point. But go ahead. I'm sorry, Rita, you had your hand up.
Those are the kind of things you need to remember and think about, when choose what to. Not just
That's true.
if Megan's kids be very careful about what they watch, what they don't watch, and they come to our house and we let them watch something that they wouldn't be allowed to do.
Therefore, must be okay because.
We have to be, that we realize that not just. I remember. Oh, well, oh. And you just, someone said,
Yeah.
thanks a lot.
Thanks for no help.
But yeah, because it does, it.
Yeah. And people don't see us as individual. People see us, oh, you're a member there, and this is what you do, right? They associate those two things.
Rita made a point that the most powerful thing we do have is our example. That's really the difference. When Megan and Corey say, girls, this is what we do at our house, they have friends there that listen to it, or Raven and Tori go and say, look, we can't do that. We're not allowed to do that or whatever. Those are the examples that try to erode some of the questioning. Should we be doing this? If it's not okay here, why is it okay here? I think the example is powerful.
Yeah. And the other part about, we were talking about movies like Titanic here, and I've got some verses here we'll read together in a moment. One of the points about about the entertainment industry, television and movies now, that is a bit different than what it used to be, where you if you wanted to watch a movie, you went to a theater, and now you don't always do that. In fact, because of COVID now, most movies are being released directly on streaming services. They aren't going to movies, right? One of the things about this is I think, we're struggling in talking about movies like this that are questionable or even improper for us to be watching. And I look on the flip side and think how many movies there are out there that are perfectly good, inspirational, you learn something from them, they're worthwhile watching, that are available for us to watch. That we don't even need to think about watching movies like this. That's the other side of this. Now, you and I have at our disposal literally hundreds, probably thousands of movies that are really good movies. I know Rita and I, like, one of the things we watch anymore, we find these movies. There are tons of movies about people that did really heroic things during World War II. And they were basically untold stories. Nobody ever heard about them, and then the story gets uncovered, and somebody makes a movie about what they did. Interesting. It's always interesting. You learn about the war, and they're historically accurate. What did the person do? We were just watching one of them that was called the Resistance Banker. A guy that helped to fund the resistance. He was a banker, and how he helped to secure loans and run them through the underground to finance the resistance. His story wasn't known until literally like 2000, and they put out a monument for him in 2007 or whatever. I mean, basically the guy went into obscurity because the nation didn't want people to know what really happened financially, how easy it was. This guy subverted the financial system of the government. They didn't want people to know that, so they basically hid what he did. And what he did truly was as heroic as anybody else. He did his part to help the war. And so things like that are worth watching, worthwhile. They show about heroics and people stepping up and making, brave decisions, putting their life at risk. In fact, this man was shot because eventually was caught. But nevertheless, what he did made a difference in the war. And so, people like that are the people that we should be thinking about and watching and learning about what they did. They're instructional, they're motivational, they're inspirational at times to us. We got a whole repertoire of those things at our fingertips now, rather than watching these things that are improper, that we shouldn't be watching, that don't help us, don't make us grow, and so on. And I wrote down a few verses here, and let me read the ones. I came up with the same on my own. I just made my own list, and I overlapped everything in the book here. But I wrote down James 1:19 and 20. Wherefore, my beloved, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. For the wrath of man works not the righteousness of God. I was thinking about that with the Kinney show, everybody getting upset and angry at each other. Well, God's righteousness isn't worked out by our anger. And in Ephesians 5, in verses 3 and 4. Right? All fornication, uncleanness, or covetousness, let it not be once named among you as become saints. Neither filthiness or foolish talking or jesting, but rather giving of thanks. In verse 5, no whoremonger or unclean person or covetous man has any inheritance of the kingdom of God. Ephesians, if you go on down in Ephesians, same chapter, Ephesians 5, verse 11, have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them. Ephesians 5:11 there. Ephesians 5:16 is one of them I think about here, in choosing to spend my time watching something. Redeeming the time because the days are evil. We have a limited amount of time. Don't waste it on foolish and in fact hurtful things. Redeem it. Use it for some profit to you. Okay, and so Mark 4:19, the cares of this world and the deceitfulness of riches and the lust of other things choke the word and it becomes unfruitful. So we have to realize that the things we watch, the things we hear, the things we see can choke the word and it becomes unfruitful in us. So we have to be careful about the ways we spend our time, the things we do, because they do influence what we become, you know, and they're collective. They influence what we will be and what we can do. So with that said, we are out of time on this lesson. So I think next week will be lesson 10, I want to say. 8, okay, sorry. So I skipped between 7 and 9, so we'll do 8 next week. All right, thank you everybody. We're out of time.